We're going to finish up Ruth today. We're in Ruth chapter 4. If you want to go ahead and just turn there, and we'll cover that chapter, and we will finish up that book today. So before we jump in, let's pray and ask God's blessing on our time tonight. Excuse me. God, thank you so much once again for this evening. I thank you for those who are here just to dive deep into your word. And so as we wrap up this story, God, I'm so grateful for the story of Ruth and what we learn through the characters of Ruth and Naomi and Boaz and all that happens for them. And so, God, I pray, as good as a story as it is, I pray that it wouldn't just be a really great story that's back in history, but it would be something that inspires us for how we should live and how we should be more faithful to you. And so I pray that your Holy Spirit would help us understand those things. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, so let's do a quick review because Ruth is short enough where we can kind of do a little pass over all of it just real quick to get our bearings. So, chapter 1 of Ruth, there was a family of Elimelech and Naomi. That's a husband and wife. You had Mahlon and Chilion, their two sons, and they leave their homeland, which is Bethlehem, because of a famine. They head to Moab to kind of search for relief from the famine. So the husband, Elimelech, then dies. The sons marry foreign women. They marry Moabite women. And then the sons die, right? One daughter-in-law, of the two women that they married, one daughter-in-law, she returns to her country. The other, which is, of course, the namesake of the book, Ruth, she stays with Naomi. They return to Naomi's homeland in Bethlehem. So you have, at the end of chapter 1, you have two widows in a desperate situation. And I know I've hit this big time over the past few weeks. I love that last line of chapter 1, the barley harvest is just beginning, because it tells you something good news is on the way for them. So that's chapter 1. Chapter 2 of Ruth, Ruth takes up one of her only options as a widow. She gleans in the field. She basically gets the leftovers of what the harvests are leaving. She finds herself in a field owned by a man named Boaz. I'm going to just get crowd participation. Here we go. Boaz takes a special interest in Ruth. Then Ruth returns to Naomi. She tells her what's going on. And Naomi has this revelation that she shares with Ruth. Boaz is actually fulfills this role of a guardian redeemer for their family. Your Bible might say kinsman redeemer. But it's this kind of Hebrew concept of a person in the family who can kind of restore honor when a misfortune has happened. And so Boaz just so happens to be their guardian redeemer. Chapter 3 was last week, and I know Josh led. I was able to be on vacation for a few days last week, so Josh led. I watched it online. He did a great job. So last week we learned Naomi is actually a bit of a schemer, and so she hatches a plan that honestly looks a whole lot like Ruth seducing Boaz when he's by himself, when he has had a little bit too much to drink. And so we learned chapter 3 has a little bit of a scandalous nature to it. But honestly, it's hard to find fault in either Naomi or Ruth because this is how desperate their situation was. They needed to use any means necessary. Their survival is kind of at stake here. But the way the whole thing goes down really proves what an honorable man Boaz is. He has the situation in front of him, but he wants to do things the right way. And so he tells Ruth he's not going to put her reputation at risk. And actually part of doing things the right way means that he's going to approach a relative even closer to see if he wants to fulfill that role of guardian redeemer before then it's passed off to Boaz. So again, all this makes Boaz look really, really, really good. And he's going to do things the honorable way, the right way. So that gets us, so it's only 4 chapters, so that's the first 3 chapters. Anybody have any questions so far about what's gone on? I know that we have, let's see, chapter 1, we were here. Chapter 2, we couldn't meet. I tried to do an online version. Chapter 3, Josh taught. So it's kind of been a little bit of a mixed bag. Any questions about chapters 1 through 3? You guys feel like you got the story pretty well? Is a question, are we phoning a friend for, no, I'm just kidding. Calling a lifeline? No, it's good. All right, so if we're good on the story of 1 through 3, then let's go ahead and jump into chapter 4. So chapter 4, verse 1, again, make sure you have your Bibles open. And we're going to flip around a little bit. So if you want to get a bookmark or a pen to keep a place here and there, we're going to go back and forth a little bit, namely from Ruth to Deuteronomy, and I'll tell you when we get there. So, verse 1 of chapter 4. Meanwhile, Boaz went up to the town gate and sat there just as the guardian redeemer he had mentioned came along. Boaz said, "Come over here, my friend, and sit down." And so he went over and sat down. So the town gate would have been kind of the hub of activity in that time. And so if it was on your mind to try to go and catch somebody, to meet somebody that you were looking for, your options were basically go straight to their home or go to a place where a lot of traffic was crossing. So in the town gate, you had merchants conducting business, visitors, messengers, judges, all kind of at the town gate. So this is common sense, of course, but I feel like we don't always understand this. You couldn't call somebody, you couldn't text them, email them and say, "Hey, meet me here." You just kind of had to go where you hoped that they were. So either go to their house or the town gate was another option. So that's where we find ourselves at Ruth chapter 4. And on top of that, there's already kind of an interesting Hebrew language thing happening in this first verse. So your translation is probably like mine, where Boaz calls the man friend, right? He says, "Come over here, my friend, and sit down." Is that what yours says, or something like that? So this is a Hebrew phrase, poloni almoni. Sounds like a pizza you would order at an Italian restaurant. Poloni almoni is what's translated as my friend there. And really what we're going to find out is friend is a pretty gracious translation. So you'll see this phrase elsewhere. It's in 2 Kings, and it says, "Now the king of Aram was at war with Israel. After conferring with his officers, he said, 'I will set up my camp in such and such a place.'" It always struck me. I remember going past this verse as I've read through 2 Kings before, and this has struck me, why doesn't he know where his camp is going to be? But this is a Hebrew idiom when you either don't know the name or the name's not really that important. So maybe in the story in 2 Kings, as the person is telling it, okay, the name of where he's going to put his camp is not really that important, so it's in such and such a place. It doesn't really matter for the bearing of the story. So a better translation of Ruth 4 verse 1 would really be, "Come over here, so-and-so, and sit down." Right? So-and-so, such and such, what's your face? These are things that the name's not important, or I forget the name or whatever it is. And so it's this Hebrew idiom, poloni almoni, so-and-so. And I think it's interesting because we find out in a few minutes, the closer relative is really a total disappointment. So it's really on him, even more so than on Boaz, to step in as the guardian redeemer. Spoiler alert, he doesn't do it. And so the author of the story is already telling you, hey, he's not even worth remembering. I don't even know his name. I'm not even going to give you his name. He's so-and-so, right? This guy's purely just disappointing. Allie probably thinks this is funny, me bringing this up. Who's a Stranger Things fan? Anybody? You can raise your hand. It's all right. We're all here. Okay. This is going to go over everybody's head. Never mind. I won't even say it because it's just such a niche little joke. No one's going to get it. I'll tell you later, Gracie. I'm not going to bore everybody else with this. There's a character in Stranger Things who's just a total disappointment, waste of space. Mike's dad, Ted Wheeler, right? He doesn't do anything. And so it's kind of like this. So Mike's dad is so-and-so basically in Stranger Things. Anyway, nobody else cares about that. We're going to keep moving on. But yeah, so he's not even important enough in the story. And in a story where names mean so much, right? We've already changed Naomi's name, and we've seen how her son's names actually mean what actually is going to happen to them. Their names are sick and dead, and they get sick and die. And Naomi's she goes from pleasant to bitter. And so names mean so much, but now we get to this guy and we're like, you don't even need his name, right? So come over here, so-and-so, and sit down. Verse 2. Boaz took 10 of the elders of the town and said, "Sit here," and they did so. Elders were usually like the clan leaders. They were household heads of household, and they functioned as like the governing body of the city. And so even though you get this scene, there's not really a judgment to pass here. It's just kind of a process that they go through, but you still need the elders there to make sure you're doing it correctly. And so they're going to watch over this process, and they're going to be witnesses to it, even though they're not going to pronounce a judgment on it. So verse 3, then he said to the guardian redeemer, so Boaz says to so-and-so, Naomi, who has come back from Moab, is selling the piece of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. And so your Bible might say our brother Elimelech, not our relative. Brother is probably the more accurate translation. It does mean brother, but they would use brother very liberally. So it could be a relative. It could be somebody more distantly related. And Elimelech and so are probably not brothers. They're probably just relatives. Verse 4. I thought I should bring the matter to your attention and suggest that you buy it in the presence of those seated here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, do so. But if you will not, tell me, so I will know, for no one has the right to do it except you, and I am the next in line. So thus far, don't go any further than verse 4. Thus far, what are we talking about in this transaction? What is at stake? Look at verse 3. What is happening? What is at stake here? What is it? Property, right? That's it. Thus far, it's only property. We have not mentioned Ruth yet at all. So it's only property, and that comes into play here in a minute. But right now we have the very, very honorable Boaz. He's doing things in the right order. Ruth and Naomi, they need this guardian redeemer, and it sounds like it has to happen in a certain order. So first is so-and-so, and then next is Boaz in the chain of the way the things to go. But there's a plot twist here, because the whole time in the story, who are we rooting for in the story? Boaz, right? We're rooting for Boaz to be the guy to come in and make this right. And so the whole time we're hearing about how gracious and kind he is and how he's doing the right thing. And even in the middle of a seductive sort of scene, he still does the right thing. And so we think that Boaz is really the guy. But what's so-and-so's response right here? I will redeem it, he says. I will redeem it. So even right now, the author is kind of keeping you guessing. He's built this whole thing up so Boaz looks like the guy, but right now it's kind of a little bit of a gear shift. The so-and-so character is actually going to take care of it for now. Verse 5. Then Boaz said, on the day you buy the land from Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the dead man's widow, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property. At this, the guardian redeemer, so-and-so, says that I cannot redeem it because I might endanger my own estate. You redeem it yourself. I cannot do it. So before it was just land, and when it's just land, it's like a no-brainer, right? So he would buy the land, he would enlarge his estate. There's an upfront cost, but it's really kind of a big real estate sort of investment, and it makes sense down the road. So he's going to enlarge his estate and probably provide for his descendants long into the future. But things change once Ruth is involved in the transaction. Why do things change?
He didn't need another woman.
Almost had a spit take there. Doesn't need another woman, right? Somebody this morning said you got another mouth to feed. If it's Ruth, if it's anybody, any child that she has, right? What else? Why is it different with Ruth? She's a Moabite. She's a foreigner. Yeah. I think all these are true. I think there's an added layer. What's that? That might be true too. It does seem like he has taken an interest in her. I think all those things are true, but it gets a little bit deeper. So look back at Boaz's statement there. He says, on the day you buy the land from Naomi, this is verse 5, the day you buy the land from Naomi, you also acquire Ruth, the dead man's widow, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property. So let's kind of dig into what that really means. Again, nothing that you have said is untrue. It probably is a little bit of a hesitation because she is a foreigner. It is another mouth to feed, all that sort of stuff. So a couple of weeks ago, we brought up a text from Deuteronomy where this guardian redeemer law is covered, right? And so I want you to kind of keep your thumb in Ruth or put a bookmark or a pen in there and then go to Deuteronomy 25 because we're going to live in this for just a minute and I want you to see it for yourself. So Deuteronomy 25, we're going to head over there. I'll give you just a minute. If you go backward, it should be Ruth, then Judges, Joshua, Deuteronomy, right? All right. Deuteronomy 25, look at verse 5. This is where that law is. If brothers are living together and one of them dies without a son, his widow must not marry outside the family. Her husband's brother shall take her and marry her and fulfill the duty of a brother-in-law to her. So this is where you get the idea of a guardian redeemer. So it's the husband's brother, or as we see in Ruth, it's the closest living relative. And so again, we see Boaz going by the book here. All right, look at verse 6 in Deuteronomy. Here's so-and-so's stumbling block. The first son she bears shall carry on the name of the dead brother so that his name will not be blotted out from Israel. So more than likely, this is so-and-so's big problem right here. So buying Naomi's land is one thing. There's an investment up front. Hopefully it pays off in the end because his estate is enlarged. And so it's kind of a common sense sort of thing. But if he marries Ruth and then he has a child through her, then that child is legally looked at as the child of Mahlon, who was Ruth's dead husband, right? So the child is then Elimelech's grandchild. So all this is getting further and further outside of so-and-so's immediate family, right? So he's carrying on the name of the guy who died and not really his own name as the head of the household. And so the child is Elimelech's grandchild, so Naomi's husband, and out of the guardian redeemer's family, out of so-and-so's family, only that child then has a claim on Elimelech's property and estate. Does that make sense so far? Are we kind of clear on that? Laura, you look a little bit confused. So you're continuing all this it kind of moves over and switches, and it has a bearing on a family that's not your own. And obviously is a distant relative, but not his immediate family. And so-and-so really has not done anything to provide for his own family. He's really kind of made his properties and the inheritances much more complicated. And he's given money away kind of for Naomi's land in more or less a charity case, right? So you would do this because you felt like you needed to rescue your relative, not because it really does anything for you and your family. It's pretty much a charity case. And so you really have to want to do this. And of course, so-and-so doesn't want to do this, right? So let me give us a fuller picture of this law and this tradition. And I want to look at one more place, but you don't have to go there. You stay in Deuteronomy and Ruth. Keep those two bookmarked. But there's a very, very early story in the tribe of Judah. And the tribe of Judah is where the people in Ruth are coming from as well. So they're in Bethlehem in Judah, so the tribe of Judah is their tribe. So early story in the tribe of Judah, where we see how seriously families take this responsibility and really how seriously God takes this responsibility. So Genesis 38, and again, you don't need to go there, I have it here for a second. Judah, the person, the original person, so not the tribe yet, but Judah, the person, has a son named It's E-R, what a great name for a son, So he has a son named and all it says about him is that he was wicked, and God puts him to death. So short and sweet story about this poor guy. I don't know if he's poor, he's wicked. But he's wicked, God puts him to death. And then so Judah then talks to another one of his sons, and his son's name is Onan. And he tells him, okay, you kind of have to be the guardian redeemer for this guy As he was wicked, he died, whatever, but you need to be his guardian redeemer for his family. So Genesis 38 verse 8 says, Judah says to Onan, sleep with your brother's wife and fulfill your duty to her as a brother-in-law to raise up offspring for your brother. So you see that law in Deuteronomy, you see it right here too, right? So it's important to them all the way back at the very beginning. But much like so-and-so in the book of Ruth, Onan does not want to have offspring that are not his. This is not, appealing to him at all. And so verse 9, I'm not going to share. It's a little bit graphic. You can look it up later. But basically what happens is he takes matters into his own hands to make sure that his brother's wife does not conceive when he sleeps with her. And so here's how God feels about it. Verse 10. What he did was wicked in the Lord's sight, so God puts him to death too, right? So this is important. You have pretty serious stories way back in the early history of the tribe of Judah. So this is happening from Judah's very next generation. And so this is baked into their history. situations like this and the consequences of them, however it plays out, whether it goes well, whether it doesn't go well, they're baked into the very early history of Israel and really the early history of this tribe in particular. And we'll come back to the tribe stuff here in just a bit. All right, so go back to Ruth just for a second. Keep Deuteronomy bookmarked, though. Ruth 4, verse 7. Now, in earlier times for Israel, for the redemption and transfer of property to become final, one party took off his sandal and gave it to the other. This was the method of legalizing transactions in Israel. So, in case you're curious about this whole sandal thing, does that sound kind of odd to you as well? Right? This is a little strange. So, one commentator that I read talked about property ownership really being described as like walking off the land. So literally moving through your land, and that was kind of a symbol of how you own that land. So back in Genesis 13, God first shows Abraham, and he's then called Abram, but he shows him the land that he's going to give him, and it says this is God talking. Look around from where you are to the north and south, east and west. All the land that you see I will give to you and your offspring forever. I'll make your offspring like the dust of the earth, so that if anyone could count the dust, then your offspring could be counted. Go, walk through the length and breadth of the land, for I am giving it to you. So you have this idea, again, really, really early on in the story. This is Genesis, the first book, 13 chapters in, really early on in the story, that this idea of walking both of your dimensions of your land. So he says, walk the length and the breadth. Walking your dimensions of the land is kind of connected with how you own the land. God's going to give it to him, and he says, Abram, go and walk the length and breadth of the land. So this idea of walking off your land is connected to owning the land. And then others will go a little bit further with this idea, probably from this same tradition early on in their history. The land itself then becomes measured in sandal lengths. So if you think of walking off the land, or how we might say, oh, that's 10 feet away, I'm going to walk it off, and my feet, you walk off your land. And so at some point, they're saying that land becomes measured in sandal length. So you go buy someone's land and you want 200 sandals of land or whatever, that sort of thing, right? And so from these traditions that we get about walking, and specifically about someone's sandals, the sandal itself gets associated with land transactions. That's kind of somebody's theory. We don't really know this 100% for sure, but that's kind of the theory that they're pulling together about how you end up with this weird thing about, okay, what does sandals have to do with transactions, and what's going on here, right? I think they did.
What if they were the wrong size?
That's a good point. I don't really know what they would do. These are great questions. I really don't know.
I bet they were one size fits all.
One size, how comfortable would that be, right? Right? So this helps us begin to make sense. Again, you read through the Old Testament, and honestly, I think much more than the New Testament, the Old Testament has some real foreign, confusing, strange things that we come across. And so you read through about these sandals and you're like, what in the world does that mean? And then there's some little connections here and there where we begin to kind of piece together, okay, here's how they probably got there. Here's how this makes sense to them. And so knowing all this, let's finish up. So I told you we're going to go back to Deuteronomy. So go back to Deuteronomy 25. Let's finish up the part of the law about the guardian redeemer. So now that we know all about the sandals and all about providing for the dead man's family, all this sort of stuff, and it works into the rest of the story. So here's the rest of that law. We left off at verse 7. However, if a man does not want to marry his brother's wife, she shall go to the elders of the town gate. Again, you have a scene at the town gate, right? My husband's, not my brother's husband. That's a whole different law right there. My husband's brother refuses to carry on his brother's name in Israel. So again, it's not about his name, it's about the dead relative's name, all about that family over there. He will not fulfill the duty of a brother-in-law to me. Then the elders of the town shall summon him and talk to him. If he persists in saying, I do not want to marry her, his brother's widow shall go up to him in the presence of the elders, take off one of his sandals, spit in his face, and say, this is what is done to the man who will not build up his brother's family line. That man's line shall be known in Israel as the family of the unsandaled. And again, you read this without any other knowledge, and you're like, what is happening here, But it helps to connect it a little bit. And I still don't know if it like makes 100% sense to me, but it helps. It kind of gives you a little bit of that connection and where they're getting that from. So based on the sandal connection with the land and walking off the land, taking off a sandal is really symbolic of removing someone's claim from a property. Does that kind of make sense, more or less, how we get there? And then also, in addition to all that, removing claim to the land, and then there's also a bit of public humiliation that goes along with this, because family was important, right? So, if you are a brother or a relative and you don't want to jeopardize your children's inheritance or jeopardize, your land or create this kind of complicated family tree, there is an out to this, but there's a cost to it. But for some people, it's complicated enough that maybe it's worth a little bit of public humiliation not to get into this whole thing with somebody else's land and somebody else's heirs and all that sort of thing. Makes sense so far? Okay. And I think at this point, it's worth saying that all of so-and-so's hesitancies and all of the risk that he perceives, all that could apply to Boaz as well, right? We don't know if Boaz is already married. This is the time when you had more than one wife. We don't know if he has children. It does say you get the idea he is much older than Ruth, and so he could have been married, could have had children. And so this idea of complicating his children's inheritance and all these sort of things that maybe so-and-so kind of balks at, they could have also applied to Boaz as well. And so what happens is, this is twice in the book of Ruth this happens, you have on display for us what really could be considered kind of a sensible decision. The common sense decision in some people's situations could have been so-and-so's decision, right? You may look at this and what this means for you in the future of your family, and you say, that's not worth it. I need to provide for my own wife and my own kids, and I don't need another woman, right? And so you might decide this is not what you want to do. So a little bit of humiliation, but you escape this whole complicated thing. But you have what could be the regular response, and it highlights the generosity and the kindness of Boaz all the more. So when you see what maybe a regular person would have done, well, then we look at Boaz and we realize this is an amazing character, that he's willing to do all this. And I said it happens twice in the book of Ruth. So think back in the first chapter of Ruth, you have Ruth and Orpah are the two daughters-in-law. And they realize everybody's dead. Naomi's going to return to her homeland. They're not even from there. So Orpah makes a completely common sense decision to go back to her family, right? Nobody would really fault her for doing this. And so you have the regular common sense decision, which then elevates what Ruth does even more when you see it in light of like what the standard may have been, right? And so it happens in Ruth. We get to see the noble character, the integrity, the loyalty of Boaz and Ruth even clearer when we see maybe what the everyday person probably would have done in that situation. Okay, before we leave verse 7 of Ruth, so you can take your finger out of Deuteronomy. We're done with that for now. Go back to Ruth chapter 4, and before we leave verse 7, I want to look at it one more time. A little bunny trail here, but I want to look at it again. So, now in earlier times in Israel, for the redemption and transfer of property to become final, one party took off a sandal and gave it to the other. This was the method of legalizing transactions in Israel. So look at this verse. What is this verse really telling you? And it's a weird question, so I'm going to give you a hint. Zoom out, 30,000 foot view. What is this verse really telling you? I wouldn't look so much at the details of the verse, but the fact that this verse is here. Nothing? It's okay. It's okay. So, we talked on the very, very first week about reading the Bible with different moments in time in your mind. So you read the Bible and you think, I think it's really intuitive to think about the moment when these things happen. I think we have no trouble thinking of that moment in time. So we read the story of Ruth and we think about when this would have happened with Ruth and Boaz and all the characters. But there's also the moment in time when this would have been put on paper, right? When this actually gets written down on paper. And that moment is important as well. So what's happening in Israel's history, that they want to document this story and put it on paper long after the events actually happened. So this verse is a big giveaway that putting the story of Ruth down on paper happens long after the events themselves, right? So it doesn't tell us exactly when it was written down, but it does tell you it's at least long enough for this whole sandal tradition to have gone out of fashion. And so to the reader who's picking this up when it's written down, okay, this sandal thing has to be explained because they don't get this anymore. So it could be generations, I don't know, it doesn't really say how many years it was, but we like to think that this happens in the reign of King David. So you have several generations, we'll see that at the end in the genealogy. And so it's long enough for them to be like, all right, they don't know what this is. like we don't know what this is. So maybe they had the exact same conversation that we just had about the sandals and everything else. So it's just one of those little things that we kind of miss when we read Scripture. We miss those hints and clues that maybe we're not really looking for, but it tells you, hey, this is written down much later. Something important was happening long after the sandal thing, and they wanted to write this whole thing down again and get it in front of people. We'll talk more about that here in a little bit. All right, verse 8. So the guardian redeemer said to Boaz, buy it yourself, and he removed his sandal. Now, in Deuteronomy, there's also the custom of spitting in the guy's face, right? But we don't see this in the book of Ruth. And so either the penalty gets softened over time, or either it's only the widow herself who has spitting rights in this situation, or it's further proof of Boaz's character, right? This is what would normally happen, but Boaz is not going to do that, right? It's not a good look for anybody. He's not going to do that. Verse 9. Then Boaz announced to the elders and all the people, today you are witnesses that I have bought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Chilion, and Mahlon. I have also acquired Ruth the Moabite, Mahlon's widow, as my wife, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property, so that his name will not disappear from among his family or from among his hometown. Today you are witnesses. So in this statement, we know beyond a shadow of a doubt that Boaz is well aware of what he's doing. So we keep hitting the same thing, his noble, his high character, and now we see him basically spelling out the law. He knows exactly what he's doing. There's no confusion about what's happening here. His first child is going to be in the name of somebody else. And it's all to maintain the name of the dead, the name of Mahlon, and really the estate of Elimelech. Verse 11. Then the elders and all the people at the gate said, we are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the family of Israel. May you have standing in Ephrathah and be famous in Bethlehem. Through the offspring the Lord gives you by this young woman, may your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah. So, verse 11 and 12, the crowd gives this blessing upon Boaz and Ruth. And so here's kind of an ancient cultural thing. Look at those verses really closely. Who does that blessing really focus on? Right? Look back at those two verses. Who is the focus of those blessings? The descendants. Yeah. It's all about the descendants. So it's all about the future children. So like nowadays, if you were going to kind of speak encouragement to a couple who had just gotten married, or if you were going to be at a wedding, if you were going to write a card to them or whatever it was going to be, kind of speak blessing into their life, you would talk about how they now have found their best friend. And now they have their companion, and now they have their person. And you would wish the bride and groom, the couple, years of happiness, that they're going to grow old together, all that sort of stuff. And it's going to be focused on that relationship, the couple. But back then, the whole point of getting married was really to provide a line of descendants for yourself. So the whole point of getting married is to produce children. So over and over and over again, especially early in the Old Testament, you have this command to be fruitful and multiply, right? That's the point. And so it's a sign of God's blessing that you have many children. And conversely, it's a sign of being out of favor of God if you're childless. Again, I want to make sure we understand that's their culture. It's not our culture. Yeah, right? Because a lot of people are childless, and that's a heartbreaking situation, especially if you want to have children. But that's not how they would have looked at it then. You're out of favor with God somehow. So for them, the ultimate end goal of marriage is about producing a family, about a line of descendants. So the blessings and the encouragements to Ruth and Boaz all have to do with the future progeny, basically, it's going to come out of this relationship. So in one sentence of these blessings, they bring up Rachel and Leah. So you can look at that. Rachel and Leah were the wives of Jacob. And so they're speaking blessings that specifically have to do with the original nation of Israel. Jacob has 12 sons. Those 12 sons become the 12 tribes of Israel. So this blessing about the wives of Jacob has to do with the general nation of Israel. But then they have another blessing they speak, and it has to do with Judah and Tamar and Perez, which really has in mind one of those tribes. And so there's a blessing that really has to do with their history, their own tribal history as well. So you have an intentional blessing that has the whole nation in mind, and you have an intentional blessing that has their specific tribe in mind. So these are just the important things that they would want to speak into the life of Boaz and Ruth. Verse 13. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. When he made love to her, the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. So Ruth conceives, Ruth has a son, and then watch in 14 how we suddenly totally switch focus here. Verse 14, the women said to Naomi. So suddenly we begin to look a whole lot more at Naomi. Let's read through this. The women said to Naomi, praise be to the Lord who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel, which is a nice bit of foreshadowing if this story is really about David and David's family. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age, for your daughter-in-law who loves you and who is better than 7 sons has given him birth. By the way, another little rabbit trail. Does Naomi have 7 sons? So Ruth is better than 7 sons, but does Naomi have 7 sons? How many does she have? 2. So 7 is a number that really means complete. And so, again, these things are not always literal. These things are really symbolic sometimes. So basically what they're saying is, Naomi, even if you had the complete, perfect family, Ruth is still better than this, based on what Ruth has done for you. So that's where the idea of 7 sons comes in. Even if your family was totally complete and perfect, Ruth is better than that. So, and again, the focus switches to Naomi because the issue at stake was always really Naomi's issue in the first place of the story. So Ruth is simply an incredibly loyal and kind companion to Naomi, but the problem at hand here was always really Naomi's issue to be dealt with. Naomi's family needed to be redeemed, and Naomi herself needed to be rescued. And then don't miss this. Look back at those 2 verses. Who is the guardian redeemer now? In those 2 verses. So the whole time we've had this understanding that it's Boaz. But if you look at verse 14 and 15, read through those one more time. Who is the guardian redeemer? What is it? Not the Lord. The Son. So it's a little bit tricky. I understand why you would have thought it was God, because the pronouns are a little bit tricky in that verse. But really, the guardian redeemer is now the child. So you have this total focus switch. Now it's about Naomi, and now it's about this son who is to be born, and he's the guardian redeemer. So the situation that Naomi was in is not just desperate because she needs things day to day, and she does. I mean, she needs to know where her meals are coming from, that sort of thing. But in those days, your children were your security long into your old age. And so she needs the day-to-day stuff, but she also needs to know that when she is older and can't care for herself, she has someone who will do that for her. And so this is a guardian redeemer for Naomi and Naomi's future. And so these days, it's a little bit different how we think of this, right? Like, I would love to think that in my old age, Zoe is going to want to care for me, right? But I think the jury's still out on whether she's going to do that or not. But it's not quite as important. It's not quite as a survival issue, because now we have systems in place that help you do this, right? You have Social Security, you have Medicare, you have all these things that are in place to help you receive care. So now your concern for your children is more like their continued love and compassion and their companionship, not necessarily your actual survival, right? So this is how it's different back then. She needed an heir. She needed a son. to ensure that she was taken care of into her old age. And so a son and an heir is more a solution to Naomi's problem than it is to Ruth's problem. Does that make sense? All right. So another fun little thing that happens in the story. Back in chapter 1, Naomi encounters, at the end of chapter 1, she has all these misfortunes. She comes back into her hometown, and she encounters the women at the town specifically. And she has a few things to say to them. She says that God has afflicted her. Her life is bitter. She changes her name. She went away full, but God brought her back empty. And now in chapter 4, she encounters the women of the town again. Only they're speaking pretty much the opposite sort of blessing on her than what she was speaking about herself in chapter 1. So God has not left her. Hello. That was weird. God has not left her without a guardian redeemer. She will be renewed and cared for. So it's a great little, do you guys know what that was? That's terrifying. So somebody make sure we don't have any ghosts in here. So it's a great little bookend piece, right? You have the end of chapter 1, all about encountering the woman and her letting her know what all misfortune has gone on in her life. And then you have the end of chapter 4, same people in the same situation, but it's pretty much the opposite narrative, right? They're speaking blessings and letting her know how God has not abandoned her, God has not left her, and she has a guardian redeemer. Just beautiful storytelling. Verse 16, then Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him. The women living there said, Naomi has a son. Who has a son? Naomi has a son, right? So again, this son through Ruth is so significant for Naomi, right? This means so much for Naomi. So Naomi is provided for in her old age, and she and the late Elimelech, now they have an heir. And this grandson, this literal grandson, is really going to perform the duties of a son that her dead sons would have done for Naomi in her old age. So they say outright, Naomi has a son, right? Just a way that they would look at this. And they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. This then is the family line of Perez in verse 18. And so then, let's pause just for a second. So you get into this genealogy that kind of finishes up the story. And what we're doing is we're connecting this story back with the original tribe of Judah. And so you see how this is connected. And so let me just kind of walk it back through their history here. This may be total review for you, but in case you need it, here it is. So the whole nation of Israel begins with God selecting one man. We talked about it on Sunday, Abram and Sarai. They have their names changed to Abraham and Sarah. So you have Abraham at the very beginning. Abraham has a son named Isaac. Isaac has a son named Jacob. Jacob's name is changed to Israel. Israel means struggles with God. Jacob, in one story, has a literal wrestling match with a messenger from God. But honestly, the whole nation of Israel, the people that the whole Old Testament is about, you could sum up their entire story by struggling with God, right? So it's an apt name for them as well. So Jacob and Israel are the same person. He has his name changed. They kind of use it interchangeably. Israel, or Jacob, has 12 sons. Those 12 sons really become the tribes of the nation of Israel. And so you have those 12 tribes that fall underneath there. And so if you want to kind of locate this story, then you would have an individual tribe of Judah that is in those 12 tribes of the nation of Israel. So again, that may have been review for you. You may have had that in Sunday school, that sort of thing, but it's there up there if you kind of follow what we're doing here. So really what you have is Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Judah, and then Perez. And that's where you would finish this genealogy that we have started right there at verse 18. So again, you root this genealogy and story in Perez. It's kind of like rooting the story in their very early origins, the tribe of Judah, which automatically is going to make this story more important if you can put it back in your very foundation. So it'd be like me convincing you that my heritage goes all the way back to George Washington, right? That would be really, really important. It doesn't, but you would probably think that was pretty cool if I could convince you that I go back to the forefather of America. So Perez was the father of Hezron, Hezron the father of Ram, Ram the father of Amminadab, Amminadab the father of Nahshon, Nahshon the father of Salmon, Salmon the father of Boaz. So finally we've gotten to our story here. Boaz is the father of Obed, Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of David. And so the ending genealogy is kind of like, I think you all appreciate this, it's kind of like a Paul Harvey story, right? Remember what Paul Harvey would always say at the end? Now you know the rest of the story, right? So you have this little family who is almost blotted out from Israel, right? They almost don't even survive past these two sons who die, but it survives through these two widows and a generous man. And so the son that's born is the grandfather of none other than King David. And now you know the rest of the story, right? But think about this. It would be crazy, right? So imagine you are a common Israelite during the reign of King David, its best king, and this little story gets passed around. And what you realize is King David himself almost didn't exist, except for the generosity of someone like Boaz and the kindness and loyalty of someone like Ruth. So it's kind of a really cool plot twist at the end where you realize, okay, this is how this matters for me, for them back then, under the reign of King David. This is his lineage, this is his story. So that kind of covers us through the end of Ruth. And so I think I've mentioned this already. I always like to have a time of like, so what at the end. So this story is really, really meaningful. It's a beautiful story in its own right, but it also should mean something for us. So we've done our work of looking at what it would have meant for them and looking at all of their contextual, cultural sort of things. All right, now taking all that in consideration, what do we do with this story? There's so many amazing themes in this book. You have love and loyalty, generosity, kindness, provision, selflessness, and you probably understand why I love this story so much, right? And you may love it as well. But I think to get to the heart of the book, you have to look at why this book is written in the first place. So you remember again, you have these moments in time. You have that big hint in verse 7. Hey, this comes long after the story actually happened. We got to explain these sort of things, that sort of thing. So more than likely, this story is put to paper during the reign of King David. So in the book, you have a few places where you have those who need rescuing, those who need provision on the one hand, and those on the other hand who through their noble character, they provide the rescuing and provision. So in the big picture, it's Boaz who takes on a foreigner, right? Recognizes her own noble character, and he rescues and he marries Ruth. But also at the end of the story, you realize it will be their child, it will be Obed, who ultimately rescues Naomi by rescuing her husband's name and taking their family out of oblivion, basically, and providing for her into their old age. And so throughout the story, you have the completely upright and noble character who has the power and has the means, and you also have the faithful and loyal person who needs the rescuing, right? We're all there. They may not have had the means to rescue themselves, but they can display the virtue of integrity and faithfulness and all that sort of stuff. And so this is the lineage of King David. So Israel, so think now at the time of King David, Israel is a people of instability. The era of the Judges is pretty much their worst chapter in all of history, right? And this is when Ruth was being written. And honestly, their first king, King Saul, not a whole lot better than the Judges. And so Israel is Naomi and Ruth in the story. So they're the ones who need stability. They don't have the means. They're relying on someone who can provide stability for them. So just like Naomi goes from empty to full in this story, through David's reign, Israel goes from unrest to peace. They go from instability to stability as a nation, as a kingdom, through the reign of David. And so Israel can simply offer their loyalty in return. So this is a great story, kind of a way to capture what's really happening with King David and Israel through individual characters in a story that you can relate to in the book of Ruth, right? And so the story of Ruth serves in some ways to reveal what David's reign has done for them as a people. All right, now let's get to us. As much as they want to root this story, David's story, all the way back in the beginning of the people of Judah, so we can root the genealogy of Jesus back there as well. And the genealogy of Jesus goes back to this story. So Jesus' earthly roots go back to David, and they go back to this story. And so just like Naomi and Ruth, just like the people of Israel, we are people in need of rescue, right? So we can't do it on our own. We may as well be like people on the margins. We may as well be like Naomi and Ruth, who can't provide for themselves, and we're kind of surviving off the scraps of just whatever is there in front of us. We can't do anything for ourselves, but Jesus offers us his undeserved generosity and grace and his goodness and kindness. He is our guardian redeemer. Amen? So he's offering us the chance to be put in right standing. So Naomi's family becomes honored once again by having a line of descendants, and Jesus offers us to be in right standing once again as well. And so then our model is Ruth. What we should strive to be like is Ruth. We can respond, we can't save ourselves, but we can respond in love and loyalty and faithfulness and a selfless concern for other people, which is really what Ruth displays in this story. And so what they may have meant as an early story of David's family in a way to emphasize the gift of King David's reign in Israel, well, now it's a story that's a beautiful way to see how King Jesus acts on our behalf, right? And he redeems us from a desperate circumstance, and he gives us a future as well. And so again, let's just emphasize here, just like Ruth and Naomi, we don't have the means to do this ourselves. And so I think part of the Christian life for us is to realize those places, and really it's all places, where we don't bring anything to the table. And without God on our side, we don't have anything, right? And again, we're surviving, we're on the margins, we may as well be like people who are surviving off the scraps. And so what this does for me is this naturally takes me to Ash Wednesday next week. So in the form of just an announcement for you all tonight, we will not have this Bible study next week in the evening. At 6:30, we will have Ash Wednesday service. We will not have a meal at all, so don't come at 5:45. Come at 6:30, we'll observe Ash Wednesday. But what Ash Wednesday really does is it reminds us, and we'll say this to you if you come to the service, when you get ashes, I'm going to tell you, remember that you are dust, and to dust you shall return. And so it's a powerful reminder that without Jesus, we've got nothing, right? And so just like Ruth and Naomi, we're relying on his goodness and character and his kindness to provide for us. And so it's a powerful experience. It's not meant to be depressing or discouraging, but it's meant to be a reality check for what we're bringing to the table. And it's nothing. So I'd love to have you come for Ash Wednesday. And then also what we'll do from here on out is we'll obviously skip. We won't skip next week. We have Ash Wednesday, but 2 weeks from then we'll get back to Bible study. We're going to move on to the story of Solomon. So this whole story of Ruth brings us from the time of the judges and the instability to the stability of the reign of King David. We're going to move over to Solomon, which actually Solomon does really, really well as a king until he doesn't. So what Solomon does is he brings us from stability, a stable kingdom, to what then teeters back into instability, and things go bad at the end of his reign. So we're going to study Solomon 2 weeks from now, but again, don't miss next week for Ash Wednesday at 6:30. Any questions about the book of Ruth?